The late afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, casting long, honeyed rays across the cluttered countertop. I sat there, surrounded by the detritus of a life once lived fully, an open laptop with half-finished spreadsheets, an old coffee mug stained brown around the rim, and scattered photographs from happier days. My fingers hovered over a stack of Polaroids, Noah's first birthday, his toothless grin beneath a plastic party hat, the 4th of July we spent at the lake, his tiny legs paddling in the water as fireworks burst overhead, last summer's vacation in the mountains, when I slipped away for early conference calls while he and Laura hiked hidden trails. Every picture felt like a lash across my conscience. I closed my eyes and remembered the sound of his laughter echoing down the hallway when he was 6, so bright and clear it lifted me out of any bad mood. But in recent years, that laughter had faded to a distant echo. Not because he didn't laugh anymore, he still did, often, but because those moments of joy no longer included me. I'd moved out a year ago, taking a new job in the city to make ends meet. The divorce had been amicable on paper, no custody battles, a fair division of assets. But fair doesn't always mean easy. Fair doesn't mean that when I visit, I'm greeted with open arms. I exhaled slowly, pushing the photos aside. I was 38 now, and for the first time in a long time, I admitted the truth to myself. I was terrified of confronting what I'd become. A workaholic, a ghost in my own home, a man who measured success in quarterly goals rather than bedtime stories. If I tried to change now, what would I find beneath the layers of email threads and conference rooms? A father who had forgotten how to play catch? A husband who no longer knew how to speak the intimate language of marriage? My phone buzzed, jolting me from my reverie. I reached for it with a mixture of dread and hope, certain it would be another promotional text from my brokerage or a calendar reminder about next week's board meeting. But the screen showed Laura's name, marked home. I hesitated. Our last conversation had been polite but perfunctory. She let me know she'd changed the locks, and I let her know I'd sorted out new spring planting for the mailbox garden. We hadn't said, "I love you" in months. Yet here she was, reaching out again. My pulse accelerated. Was she asking for help? Did something go wrong at home? A pipe burst? A medical emergency? My mind raced through possibilities as I thumbed open the text. Laura, can you come by tomorrow morning? I need to talk. Simple. Direct. But loaded with everything I feared. Talk. With her. Without mediated screens or third-party lawyers. I reread the message. My chest tightened. I knew what a talk really meant, a reckoning. I typed a reply with shaking fingers. Me, sure. What time? Within seconds, her response came, Laura, 10 a.m. I'll leave the door unlocked. 10 o'clock. Less than 12 hours away. My heart hammered as I stared at the screen. The door unlocked. An invitation, a literal key to her life. I hadn't set foot in our old home since the divorce. The locks had been changed then, a final punctuation mark in our legal separation. But now, she was giving me back the physical threshold I had abdicated. It felt like a test. I sat back, letting the afternoon light fade from the walls. My gaze drifted to the kitchen table, where the photographs of Noah lay scattered like discarded memories. I picked up the one from his high school graduation. He stood proud in his cap and gown, tassel draped at an angle that made him look half boy, half man. His smile was radiant, but his eyes betrayed something else, a shadow of wistfulness, as though he missed the father who should have been there cheering him on. I remembered the day. It was a bright June morning. I'd been on a business trip in London, presenting to a client 4,000 miles away. I'd watched the ceremony via a grainy livestream on my phone, the connection dropping images of caps being thrown in the air. When I finally made it back home 2 days later, they had already returned the rental gown. They'd already processed my absence as normal. That incident replayed in my mind now like a broken record. How had I justified that choice to myself? It's for the family, I'd told anyone who asked. This contract will set us up for years. But it had set up an even greater distance between us. Each missed event, each unreturned call, piled higher until the bridge between me and my son was nothing more than a tenuous thread. I exhaled again, this time with determination. Tomorrow at 10, I would cross that thread, even if it snapped beneath my weight. I would unlock the door, step inside, and face whatever fallout awaited me. Because in all those lost years, one truth had become undeniable: I couldn't keep hiding behind spreadsheets and slide decks. If I wanted Noah back, if I wanted any kind of real relationship, I had to show up. That night, I barely slept. The empty bed beside me felt cavernous. Haunted. I rolled at every creak of the house, convinced I heard phantom footsteps or a knocks on the door. At 3 a.m., I got up and paced through the living room, checking my watch every 5 minutes. My phone lay on the coffee table, the screen glowing with notifications I hadn't dared open. Each buzz felt like the tick of a metronome counting down to 10 o'clock. By dawn, I drove to a late-night cafe, a small place I'd discovered when working odd hours. I ordered black coffee and sat in a corner booth, pulling out my phone to reread every text I'd ever exchanged with Noah. The earliest ones, sent on his 10th birthday, were full of emojis and affectionate sentiments: "Happy birthday, champ." Later ones were sparser: "Congrats on A on math," then dwindled to nothing. I scrolled until the night of the divorce, when I'd texted him, "We'll make it through this. I love you." He'd replied with a simple thumbs up. After that, silence. I realized I never apologized properly. Not for the missed birthdays, not for the soccer games, not even for the divorce itself. Instead, I'd guarded my pride, sending perfunctory check-ins: "Hope school's going well," that rang hollow. Tomorrow I would say the words he deserved. "I'm sorry," and mean it with every fiber of my being. I pressed my phone into the screen, closed my eyes, and pictured his face. Would he answer the door? Would he stand silently, arms crossed, daring me to prove my sincerity? Or worse, would he refuse to speak at all? My stomach twisted. But beneath the fear was something stronger: hope. The hope that he still cared enough to respond, that the thread between us, however frail, hadn't been severed completely. I drained my coffee and walked back to my car as the sky lightened. The city's hum began to stir, delivery trucks rattling down side streets, early commuters hurrying toward their offices. The familiar sounds felt foreign and urgent, as if the world itself was urging me forward. Tomorrow, I thought, I will stand at that threshold and choose him over my fear. I will cross the room to his room, meet him eye to eye, and offer the only gift that mattered: my presence. For a moment, I let myself believe it could be that simple. And with that fragile belief, I drove home to prepare. I laid out a clean shirt, polished my shoes, and drafted a message to Laura: "See you at 10. Thank you." I hit send and slid my phone into my pocket. Late into the night, I sat alone in my living room, the darkness settling around me like a slow exhale. I stared at the door, half expecting it to open on its own. But it remained still, silent. When the first light of morning crept through the curtains, I stood up, took a deep breath, and steeled myself for the day ahead. This time, I told myself, I would not turn back. I arrived at the old front porch 5 minutes before 10, the door's chipped paint and familiar brass knocker a jarring contrast to the polished corporate lobby I'd stepped out of just an hour earlier. My heart hammered as I lifted my hand to knock, a simple act that felt monumental. But before my knuckles met wood, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I fished it out, expecting another logistical message: door codes, alarm disarm instructions. Instead, the screen glowed with a text. From Noah: "You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep." The words crystallized into a chill that knotted my stomach. My breath hitched. I reread the message, thinking perhaps I was misinterpreting, a typo, an incomplete thought. But the ellipsis felt deliberate, a cliffhanger with no bridge. My wife prefers to keep, what? I typed to him, but my fingers froze. What world was he living in where our family was referred to in the third person? where my ex-wife had become his wife. My confusion quickly turned to dread. I remembered the day Laura and I married, 10 years ago, beneath lingering summer sun and everyone we loved gathered in a small chapel. Noah was 3 then, clutching his tiny tuxedo jacket and wobbling around the aisle as if it were a game. I'd looked at him, at Laura, at the future we were building, and believed everything would turn out right. Now, that belief lay in shards at my feet. I swallowed hard and stood on the porch, the key fully in my hand, suddenly heavy. I thought of the voicemail I'd left Noah last week, stilted, cautious, urging him to let me back into his life. No reply. I thought of the birthday card I'd sent, inscribed with verses about second chances. No reaction. And now this curt declaration, you won't be joining us. The rejection stung deeper than any corporate setback I'd ever faced. A flicker of movement in the window caught my eye, Laura, watching from behind the glass. She gave me a small, sympathetic nod. With a trembling breath, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar creak of the floorboards echoed like a judge's gavel. I paused in the foyer, phone still in hand, awaiting another text, an explanation, anything. The silence that followed was suffocating. Laura emerged from the living room, her face composed, but her eyes betraying concern. I saw the text, she said quietly, falling into step beside me as if guiding me through a funeral procession. I'm sorry. I don't understand, I said, voice tight. Why would he say that? Why refer to you as his wife? Her gaze flicked toward the hallway. He's angry, and he's trying to hurt you in the only way he knows how. He's confused, too. Confusion exploded inside me. Angry about what? She led me through the living room into the kitchen where the sunlight poured over the breakfast nook. Fresh coffee steamed in a pot on the counter, and today's newspaper lay folded nearby. Laura poured me a cup and handed it over. I took a shaky sip, the warmth failing to thaw the dread pooling in my chest. After you left, she began, I did what I had to do. You know that. But I also started to rebuild our lives, Noah's and mine. We got engaged again. My breath caught in my throat. Engaged? Again? The word felt like a verdict. I stared at Laura with disbelief. When? 6 months ago. He told me he wanted stability, a mother and father together, just like you once promised him. Her voice cracked on the last words. He thought I'd never find someone, and he worried I'd never let someone in. So he was angry when he found out I did. The world tilted. All the late nights, the excuses I'd made to myself, I'm doing this for us, crumbled like ash. I'd never thought to ask what his needs were. I'd never paused to consider that, in my absence, Laura had had her own heartbreak, her own journey to healing and love. And in stepping aside so completely, I'd ceded the place I once held in their lives. I set my coffee on the counter, trembling. He's married? Laura reached out, touched gentle on my arm. Not to someone else, you know that. We just got engaged. He wanted me to be happy. He wanted a family unit again. I closed my eyes, the sting of tears surprising me. I'm sorry, I whispered, but the words felt small, inadequate. For years I'd used absence as protection from failure, from heartache. But absence had only birthed new wounds, deeper and more tangled than any I'd known. She let me stand there for a moment, mourning the man I'd been and the father I could still become. Then she guided me toward the table. Let's talk to him, she said. Let's see if it's not too late. With the last of my hesitation spilled on that kitchen floor, I picked up my phone and dialed Noah's name. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he'd hear it on the line. After a long ring, he answered, Dad? His voice was flat, cautious, an unlit fuse waiting for a spark. I'm here, I said. I'm listening. And in that moment, I realized that listening, truly, openly listening, might be the only way back through the walls I'd spent years building. Laura led me up the narrow staircase to the attic, her hand grazing the peeling wallpaper, an old floral pattern that must have been in style when we first bought the house. The air was cool and musty, redolent of cedar boxes, old blankets, and the bittersweet scent of forgotten time. A single bare bulb swung gently overhead, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Dust motes drifted like lazy snowflakes in the pale glow. "I thought you might want to see this," Laura said quietly, pushing aside a stack of moving boxes. "I kept it all these years." I swallowed hard. Between us stood a plain shoebox, taped closed with yellowing masking tape. On its lid, in a child's uneven scrawl, were the words, "Noah's Memories." My throat tightened. I reached out, fingertips trembling, and peeled back the tape. Inside lay a chronicle of our son's life, small treasures I'd ignored for too long. The early years at the bottom of the box were photos from Noah's earliest days, him swaddled in hospital blankets. His first bath, tiny fists curled, his impatient grin as he took wobbly steps in the living room. I picked up a folded card, heavy with baby-scented confetti. Opening it, I saw scribbles in blue ink, "To Daddy, I love you so much. You're the best daddy in the whole wide world." It was dated May 12, 2007, his first Mother's Day without me, when he was only 2, but he'd insisted the card go to both of us. I pressed it to my face, breathing in the soft paper. I realized I'd never thanked him for that card, never called to tell him it meant everything. The heart of childhood. Next came a stack of certificates and report cards. First grade reading awards, spelling bee participation, student of the month, badges. I flipped through them, absorbing the neat teacher's comments. "Noah always has a bright question, shows kindness to classmates." Each commendation felt like a mirror held up to my absence. His teachers had seen him thrive, but I hadn't even known to ask how his classes were going. Tucked between the certificates was a crayon drawing of our family, 3 stick figures under a triangular roof, smoke curling from the chimney. He'd labeled them in his loopy handwriting, Mom, Dad, and a Noah. The space between a mom and dad was wide, more white paper than crayon. I stared at that blank space, realizing how clearly he'd perceived the distance even then. The silent please toward the middle of the box, I found a batch of letters, folded into perfect thirds and tied together with a faded ribbon. The topmost envelope was addressed in neat, block letters, "To my dad, please read me." I untied the ribbon and opened the first letter, dated November 3, 2012. My hands shook as I read, "Dad, tonight I watched you on Skype. You were talking to Mr. Hayes about the Henderson deal. You didn't see me waving at the screen. I sat there for 30 minutes hoping you'd notice. Love, Noah." I closed my eyes. He'd sat there, waiting for me to see him. He'd waited while I negotiated contracts and closed sales calls half a world away. The next letter was from March of 2014. "Dad, Mom asked if you could come to my baseball game this weekend. I know you're busy, so she said it's okay if you can't. But I really wanted you there. I threw a home run that day. Love, Noah." I found a photograph shoved inside the envelope, Noah in a dirt-streaked uniform, grinning ear to ear, bat still in his hand. He was glowing with pride. I'd never seen that photo before, never witnessed that triumph. The final plea. As I reached the bottom of the stack, I found a single letter, separated from the rest by several years and by a more forceful tapping of the box lid. The envelope was thicker, worn at the edges, and addressed simply, "For my dad, do not open until you're ready." My breath caught. I hesitated, then unfolded the paper. His handwriting had smoothed out over the years, letters uniform, the lines straight. The date at the top read October 22, 2018. "Dad, I've tried to be patient. I've tried to send texts, calls, and emails. I've told Mom I forgive you, but I'm tired of pretending this doesn't hurt. I watch you drive up the street sometimes, parked in the driveway for 10 minutes before you drive away. I know you don't come in because you think Mom blocked you out. But she says you never even tried. I need a dad who shows up. Not on FaceTime, not in letters, but right here, at the table, tucking me in, watching movies on Friday night. I miss you. Love always, Noah." My vision blurred. The floorboards creaked as I sank to my knees, letting the letter slide from my fingers. For years I'd conflated distance with doing the right thing. I'm giving you space, I told myself. But the truth lay in his words, I need a dad who shows up. I had never truly shown up. A father's reckoning. I heard Laura's footsteps behind me. She knelt beside me, her own tears glistening. Wordlessly, she wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Together, we sat in that dusty attic, two adults mourning a child's lost hopes. I didn't know, I whispered, voice raw. I didn't realize how much he missed me. She pressed the letter into my hand. He still loves you. That's why he saved these. I closed my fingers around the paper, its edges soft from time. I thought of the missed birthdays, the silent holidays, the ache in his voice when he stopped answering my messages. All of it had led us here, to a shoebox in an attic. I took a deep breath and stood, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into my pocket. Laura helped me gather the rest of the treasures. We descended the stairs in silence, the weight of the past balanced by the fragile hope of repair. Toward a new beginning in the kitchen below, I laid the letters and photos on the table. The morning sun had climbed higher, illuminating the polished surface where, only hours before, I had only found a pot of cold coffee and an empty chair. Now, spread out before me, were reminders of what I'd lost, and of what I still had to fight for. I looked at Laura, gratitude and resolve shining in my eyes. Thank you for keeping these, I said. And for showing them to me. She offered a small smile. He deserves to know you care. And so do I. I nodded, folding my hands over the stack of memories. Let's go find him, I said. It's time I started showing up. For the first time in years, the future felt open, uncertain, yes, but ripe with possibility. And as I gathered those letters to carry into the next chapter of our lives, I understood that repairing a bond this broken would take more than words. It would take presence, patience, and the willingness to bear the weight of old wounds as we worked to heal them together. The following Monday dawned crisp and clear, the kind of spring morning that whispered of renewal. Sunlight filtered through my bedroom curtains in gentle stripes, stirring me awake with a promise I hadn't felt in years, the chance to begin again. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the soft hum of the city beyond my window, and ran my hand over the stack of letters I'd retrieved from the attic. I folded them carefully, placing them in an envelope addressed to myself, to open when I need reminding. I dressed in a crisp, pale blue shirt, Noah's favorite color, I remembered from his toddler days, and polished my shoes until they gleamed. I felt both nervous and exhilarated, like a student on the first day of school. Today, I would take my first steps toward rebuilding what I had so recklessly let fracture. Morning messages. I started with small gestures. At 8:15 a.m., I sent Noah a text, Dad, good morning. I hope you slept well. Thinking of you today. I resisted the old temptation to follow up immediately or to pepper the message with excuses. Instead, I hit send and let my phone rest on the kitchen counter, its screen dark. Next, I left a voicemail for his mother, me, voice trembling slightly. Laura, thank you for sharing those letters with me. I'd like to see if Noah would be willing to meet me for lunch this week, just a quick catch-up. No pressure. Whenever he feels ready. After that, I prepared my own breakfast, a simple omelet with spinach and cheese, and sat at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. Memory and regret weighed on the seat, but I chose to imagine it as holding promise instead. The care package. That afternoon, I visited a local bookstore and picked out a first edition copy of The Hobbit. Knowing from snippets of conversation that Noah had recently rediscovered Tolkien. I slipped a handwritten note inside, Dear Noah, I remember how you used to beg me to read this aloud late into the night. I think it's time we journey back into Middle-earth together. Love. Dottie wrapped the book carefully in craft paper and mailed it to his address, adding a small sachet of Earl Grey tea, another shared indulgence from his childhood. As I dropped the package in the mailbox, I felt the first flicker of optimism in my chest, fragile but real. A surprising response. 3 days later, I awoke to a message that took my breath away. My phone buzzed at 7:47 a.m. Noah, thanks for The book. I'll see you Thursday. Bring tea. I stared at the screen for a long moment, disbelief and relief clashing inside me. I whispered, Thursday, as if willing the word into existence. Then I smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in a long while. The soccer game Thursday arrived, gray and overcast, as if the weather itself was testing my resolve. I drove to the local high school soccer field, clutching the small thermos of tea and the book in a paper bag. My palms were sweaty, my heart a rhythmic drum. I found Noah on the pitch, warming up with his teammates. He was leaner now, his hair falling into his eyes in an unruly fringe that reminded me of his 8th grade photos. When he noticed me in the stands, he hesitated, barely visible, but the tilt of his head was unmistakable. That I stood, raising a hand in a cautious wave. His teammates called after him, but he jogged over. Hey, he said, voice low, hey. I replied, extending the thermos. Earl Grey, just like you asked. He accepted it, eyes flicking to the book tucked under my arm. And the book? I shook my head with a grin. Right here, and I held it out. He took it, weighing it in his hands. The clouds broke and a shaft of sunlight lit his face as if spotlighting this long overdue reunion. Thank you, he said softly. We stood there in silence for a moment, a father and son on opposite sides of a chasm, now bridging it inch by cautious inch. First words later, after the game ended in a narrow victory for Noah's team, we walked together to the concession stand. The air smelled of hot dogs and grass cut that morning. He bought a soda with his concession money. I splurged on a bag of kettle corn. We found a bench beneath an oaken tree, its blossoms dusting the ground like confetti. I handed him the book, and he thumbed through the battered pages. I remember you reading me the first chapter under that quilt fort we built, he said, winding open the plastic bottle. You made all the voices. I laughed, chest tightening with emotion. I thought I was pretty good as Bilbo. He rolled his eyes. You were terrible, but it was fun. I nodded. I'm working on getting better. We sipped our drinks. In companionable silence, watching other parents gather their kids and head to cars. Around us, life went on, families together, laughter in the air. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in that scene in Dinner at Home that evening. Laura texted to say she'd drop by later to give me an update on a leaky faucet I had promised to fix. When she arrived, she walked into the kitchen, where I was preparing a simple pasta dish, garlic, olive oil, fresh basil. She saw the open bottle of tea on the counter and the box of kettle corn, and her lips curved in a grateful smile. I saw the kids walking home from school, she said. He's happy to have you out here. I stirred the pasta and served us each a plate. He laughed once today, I said, and I played Bilbo for him. Felt like no time had passed. Laura set down her plate and reached for my hand. You did well. I looked down at our joined hands and let myself believe it. I'm going to keep doing better. A promise made that night. After Laura left, I sat in the living room with the envelope of letters from the attic still tucked in my jacket pocket. I pulled them out and refolded each one, touching them lightly. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll call the school about his upcoming parent-teacher conference. And next week, I'll show up at his debate tournament. Above all, I vowed, I would not vanish again. Presence would be my guiding principle, showing up in body, if not always having the right words, offering support, even when I felt uncertain. And listening, truly listening. When he spoke that sleep finally claimed me, I dreamed of a table set for 3, Laura on one side, Noah on another, and me at the head. The dishes were simple, the light warm, and laughter threaded through the air. Like a song. In that dream, I realized that the first step had been taken, and that the journey ahead, though long, was illuminated by hope. That Friday evening, the air carried a promise of warmth and reconciliation. I arrived at Laura's house carrying a covered casserole dish of lasagna, Noah's all-time favorite, and a modest apple pie, its crust golden and fragrant from the bakery. The sky overhead was painted in streaks of lavender and rose, as if the world itself were scripting a hopeful prelude to our family's next chapter. Setting the table inside, the house was quieter than I remembered. Laura and Noah must have been in the living room, where I could hear the low hum of their conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter. I found them there, Laura perched on the edge of the sofa, knitting needles clicking softly, while Noah, now 17, sprawled cross-legged on the rug. Tossing a miniature soccer ball up and down between his hands, Sam's appearance prompted a brief, curious glance from Noah. He sat up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and offered me a tentative smile. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, champ," I replied, setting the lasagna on the coffee table. The aroma of tomato and melted cheese drifted through the room like a gentle invitation. Laura stood and took the pie from me, placing it alongside the casserole and smoothing the tablecloth. "No napkins under the centerpiece?" Noah teased, a familiar sparkle in his eye. I laughed, relief flooding me. "I suppose I trusted you'd handle that." Breaking bread, we moved into the dining room, where Laura had set the table, 3 mismatched plates from our wedding china, silverware neatly aligned, and a small vase of wildflowers, daisies and lavender, picked from the garden. That afternoon, the contrast to my polished corporate dinners couldn't have been greater, but it felt infinitely more significant that as we sat, the initial awkwardness dissolved in the warmth of the food. I served generous portions of lasagna, the cheese stretching like a cheesy lifeline between us. Noah inhaled deeply before taking the first bite, eyes closed in appreciation. "This is perfect," he said, his mouth too full for more words. Laura beamed. "Your dad outdid himself," she said, reaching for a serving of pie. I caught Noah's eye and offered a small nod. Encouraged, I cleared my throat. "I have something I'd like to say." He set down his fork, and the world felt suspended as I found the words that had eluded me for so long. "Noah, I know I've missed a lot of your life. I know I hurt you by being absent. I'm sorry for the birthdays I missed, the games I didn't show up for, the moments I let slip through my fingers." My voice wavered, but I kept going. "I've been selfish, and I regret it every day. I don't expect instant forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm here now, and I intend to stay." A hush fell. The only sound was the tick of the old kitchen clock. I braced for the worst, a dismissal, a cold stare, but instead, Noah reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "I know," he said. His voice was steady, carrying both the weight of past wounds and the fragile hope of healing. "I've seen you trying these last few weeks. It's not perfect, but I want you in my life." Relief and gratitude swelled inside me like a tide. "That means everything to me." Shared stories after dinner, we lingered at the table. Laura poured coffee, and I carved 2 generous slices of pie. Conversation flowed more easily now, memories of family vacations, stories of Noah's latest school projects, and even the humorous mishaps of my work life. Noah laughed as I recounted the time I accidentally forwarded an embarrassing meme to the entire office, and I listened with genuine interest as he described his plans for university. At one point, Noah leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "You know, I miss the old traditions, the pancake breakfasts you used to make on Sunday mornings, the trip to the lake every summer." I nodded. "Let's bring those back. How about next weekend, we start with pancakes? I'll even let you choose the syrup." His grin was the brightest light I'd seen in years. "Deal." Quiet moments later, after the dishes were cleared and Laura had slipped upstairs, Noah and I remained in the kitchen, leaning against the counter. He sipped his coffee, eyes tracing the familiar tiles I'd helped pick out years ago. "Dad," he began softly, "I've kept something from you." My heart clenched. "What is it?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope, the very one I had packed in my jacket that first day I read his attic letters. "I found this in my desk," he said, handing it to me. I never opened it until tonight. I recognized the handwriting and the ragged edges of the paper. Slowly, I unfolded the letter. It was one of the earlier ones, written when he was 12, a boy's plea for bedtime stories and weekend outings. Tears blurred my vision as I listened to him read it aloud, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I kept it because I wasn't sure you'd ever read it," he said when he finished. "But I'm glad you did." I pulled him into a hug, feeling the years of absence and silence wash away in that embrace. "Thank you for giving me that chance," I whispered at a family restored before I left that night. We gathered on the porch steps together, father, mother, son, 3 figures framed by the soft glow of the porch light. Noah set the lasagna container on the step beside us, and Laura closed the door behind her. Dad's jacket was still draped over the banister. Noah stepped forward, draped it across his shoulders, and took my hand. For a moment, we stood in silent unity, the worries of yesterday replaced by the promise of tomorrow. As I drove home under a canopy of stars, I thought of the dinner that had changed everything. It wasn't a sumptuous feast or an orchestrated event that did it, it was the simple act of sharing a meal, speaking truths, and choosing to trust again. We had broken bread together, but more importantly, we had mended our broken bonds, and in the quiet of my car, I whispered a vow to the night: I would never let go of this newfound closeness. We had taken the first step toward becoming a family again, and I would walk every step beside them, come what may. The morning after that dinner, I awoke with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window and danced across the walls, as if celebrating a new beginning. I lay still for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the city, the soft chirp of birds greeting the day. Somewhere in the house, the kettle clicked on, and I knew Laura was up making coffee. In my chest, a familiar warmth spread, one born of hope, of second chances, and of roads yet to be traveled together. A weekend of firsts. That Saturday, I arrived at Laura's early, carrying a load of groceries and a homemade pancake batter that smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. Noah opened the door in sweatpants and a sleepy smile, holding a soccer ball in one hand and a mug of steaming coffee in the other. Dad, he said, voice thick with sleep. You're early. I promised pancakes, I replied, stepping aside to make room for the bags. And I never break my promises. He crossed his arms, feigning sternness. Fine. But I'm in charge of the syrup. Inside the kitchen, flour dusted the counter as we worked side by side, me whisking batter, him measuring milk. Laura poured 3 mugs of coffee and set them on the island, then retreated to the living room with her knitting. The familiar chaos of breakfast preparation, eggs cracking, spatula scraping, felt like the music of home. When the first batch of golden pancakes landed on our plates, we gathered around the table, each with a tower dripping with syrup and dotted with fresh berries. Noah raised his fork in a mock toast, to the best dad ever, he said, and I caught Laura's eye. She smiled and nodded, her pride catching in her throat. I felt it, too, the pride of belonging, of being accepted once more into a life I feared I'd forfeited forever. Planning for tomorrow. Later that afternoon, Laura and I settled on the sofa with wedding brochures and Pinterest printouts scattered around us. She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, as we flipped through color schemes and venue options. I want something simple, she said, tracing a picture of an outdoor arbor draped in white roses. But with a twist of vintage, just like this. I nodded, studying the image. I love it. What do you think, champ? I looked to Noah, who lounged cross-legged on the floor, phone in hand. He glanced up, thoughtful. I like the idea. But how about we include some lavender? It's from Mom's garden, and it ties back to weddings Grandma used to have. Laura beamed. Perfect. Lavender it is. In that small exchange, I saw how far we'd come. Where? Once I had feared Noah's resentment, now he offered ideas of his own. His acceptance of Laura's fiancé, and of me, shone brightly in that moment of collaboration. An afternoon drive to celebrate our progress, I suggested a drive into the countryside. We piled into my car, the windows down, and let the wind comb through our hair as we followed winding roads flanked by rolling hills. The radio played a mix of old rock ballads, songs I'd once shared with Noah on long drives when he was little. We stopped at a roadside farm stand, where Laura picked out bunches of lavender and daisies. Noah chose a jar of local honey, the amber liquid catching the sun. I paid for our bounty and carried it back to the car, my arms full of flowers and memories. As we drove home, Larry, Laura's fiancé, called to confirm final guest numbers. Laura spoke in quick, excited tones, and I listened, marveling at how seamlessly the man had become part of our family. When she hung up, she leaned over and kissed my cheek. Thanks for being here, she whispered. I squeezed her hand. Wouldn't miss it A challenge and a promise. That evening, we gathered around Laura's dining table again, this time for a strategy session. University applications for Noah loomed on the horizon, and he needed guidance. He spread out brochures for various universities, a prestigious engineering program, a state school with a strong robotics lab, and even an art school he had discovered during a ceramics workshop. He looked to me. Dad, you've always been good at research. Think you can help me compare these? I grinned. Lead the way. We spent the next 2 hours analyzing acceptance rates, campus cultures, scholarship opportunities, and internship prospects. Laura chipped in with budgeting advice, and Larry offered tips about campus visits. It felt like a true collaboration, parents and son working toward a shared goal. When we finally packed up the papers, I rested my hand on Noah's shoulder. Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you, I said. He nodded, eyes bright. Thanks, Dad. Stars over the backyard. As night fell, we set up chairs in the backyard, draping blankets over our laps. A small fire pit crackled in the center, and the sky unfurled above us in a tapestry of stars. Laura brought out Esmore's fixings, graham crackers, chocolate, and marshmallows, while Larry strummed softly on an acoustic guitar. We roasted marshmallows, laughed at the sticky consequences, and sang along to familiar tunes. Noah rested his head on my shoulder and looked up at the constellations. Remember when you taught me how to find Orion with a flashlight? He asked. I chuckled. Your flashlight was brighter than my star map. That was the best night, he said quietly. Just you and me and the sky. My throat tightened. And many more to come. Looking forward, when the fire died down and the night grew chilly, we retreated indoors. Laura poured hot cocoa, topped with whipped cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon. We sat around the living room, the embers of reconciliation still glowing brightly. Before I left that night, we gathered on the porch for one last moment together. Laura handed me a small gift, a framed photograph from our pancake breakfast that morning. It captured our 3 faces huddled around the table, eyes alight with laughter. For the road ahead, she said softly. I held the frame, feeling the weight of past mistakes and the buoyancy of present joy. Thank you, I whispered. Noah stepped forward and wrapped me in a hug. Thanks for showing up, he said. In that embrace, I understood the true meaning of family, not perfection, but presence, not absence, but action, not the promise of tomorrow, but the commitment to walk the road ahead together, one step at a time. As I drove home under a sky still tipped with stars, I felt the promise of new chapters unfolding. The letters in the attic, the dinner that changed everything, the patched-up anniversary locks on the front door, all these became markers on a journey that lay before us, a journey of healing, of growth, and of the unbreakable bond between a father and his son. And for the first time in a long time, I was eager to see where that road would lead.